The oldest gun on this list, number 5, came home from a war that ended in 1865, a 9-shot Confederate LeMat revolver, designed in New Orleans, handed down until a descendant found it wrapped in a quilt in the attic. Brought home 80 years before the others. The newest came back from Vietnam with a capture tag still tied to the trigger guard. Between them lies an unbroken American tradition: San Juan Hill, the Argonne, Normandy, the Chosin Reservoir, the Ia Drang. After every one of those wars, men carried the guns of their enemies up into the attics and crawl spaces of ordinary houses and left them there, wrapped, oiled, unexplained. A century of trophies hidden by men who would not talk about them, inherited by families who cannot identify them. Some are worth a few $100s. Number 1, an engraved Nazi presentation pistol, is appraised at up to $400,000, more than most of the houses it sat above. 25 guns, from the Civil War to Vietnam, counted down by what they are worth now. Number 25, the Nagant M1895 revolver. It is the oldest design on this list, still being carried when Americans captured it. A 7-shot revolver adopted by Imperial Russia in 1895 and still riding on the hips of Soviet-supplied officers half a century later. The mechanism is the strange part. When the hammer comes back, the entire cylinder slides forward to seal the gap against the barrel, squeezing a little extra velocity from the 7.62 cartridge. A solution almost no other revolver in history ever bothered with. It armed the Tsar's officers, then the Red Army, then the secret police. And by the time American soldiers met it, it was in the hands of communist forces in Korea and later Vietnam. It came back in the bottom of a barracks bag, a captured sidearm from a war that produced fewer trophies and fewer stories than the one before it. It went into a bottom drawer and stayed there. For decades, families who found one mistook it for some old European relic no one could name. The Cyrillic markings as unreadable as the silence of the man who brought it back. The markings are the whole ledger now. A shooter-grade Nagant brings $300 to $600, but a scarce example wearing Imperial Russian marks made before the revolution swallowed the factory that stamped them passes $1,000. Number 24, the Beretta model 1934. This was the pistol of Mussolini's officers, a compact .380 caliber automatic, beautifully machined, small enough to disappear into a coat pocket where no inspecting officer would look twice. Americans fighting up through the Mediterranean took them as fast as they could be surrendered, and after Italy's collapse in 1943, the same pistol came home a second way, captured from the Germans who had taken over Italian production and kept the little Beretta in service under their own stamps. Back in the States, it lived the quietest life of any trophy, in nightstand drawers and cigar boxes, in a bundle at the back of a closet shelf that a widow found 40 years later and could not explain. The bluing on many of them is worn silver in one place, where a thumb rubbed the same spot across an ocean and half a lifetime. To a collector, the small marks are the pistol's paper trail. Wartime examples carry Italian date codes marked in the fascist calendar, Roman numerals counting the years of Mussolini's regime, and some bear the German acceptance stamps of the Wehrmacht's occupation production. Those marks, and the original holster when it survives, decide the price. Most bring-back Berettas run $400 to $800, and a wartime unit-marked example, with its leather climbs, higher. Number 23, the Japanese Type 26 revolver. The name is a date, 26 for the 26th year of the Meiji Emperor's reign. 1893, the year the Imperial Japanese Army adopted its first modern revolver, a top-break 6-shooter chambered for a 9mm Japanese cartridge used by nothing else on Earth. By the Second World War, it was 2 generations obsolete. It was carried anyway, by rear echelon officers, by reservists, by men handed whatever the arsenals had left as the empire stretched past its own supply. Marines took them off the dead on islands whose names became a litany, pulled them from bunkers, from surrendered officers, from the wreckage of a defense that fought to the last man. Then they wrapped them in oilcloth for the voyage home. And the oilcloth, in many cases, was never unwrapped again. Widows came across them decades later, in trunks that had not been opened since the voyage. Grandchildren found them after funerals, holding a revolver from the reign of an emperor who died before their grandfather was born, with no idea the old man had ever owned a gun. Scarcity does the arithmetic here. Production was small, survival smaller. A Type 26 in collectible condition fetches $500 to $1,200, depending on the finish and whether the parts still match. Number 22, the Mauser Gewehr 98. This one belongs to the other war. It is the full-length German infantry rifle of the First World War, an 8mm bolt action, nearly 50 inches long, the weapon that faced American doughboys across no man's land in 1918. The men who brought it home did not call themselves the greatest generation. They came back from the Argonne and the Marne, laid the long rifle across the rafters of a barn, or stood it in the back of a closet, and let it lie there while the century moved on without them. Many of these rifles have now been hidden twice as long as the 50 years in this list's title. Their grandchildren are old men themselves. The tragedy, for a collector, happened in the decades between. Surplus military rifles were cheap, and American gunsmiths cut thousands of them down into hunting rifles. Barrels shortened, stock slimmed, sights replaced. Every one of those cuts was permanent. The rifle that survived was the one nobody touched, the one in the barn, the one under the quilts in the attic trunk. Originality decides everything here. A Spandau-made Gewehr 98 in its original military configuration brings $500 to $1,500. A sporterized one is worth a fraction of that, and no restoration ever closes the gap. Number 21, the Sauer 38H. Among the pocket pistols of the Third Reich, this was the refined one, a .32 caliber automatic with a double-action trigger and a small lever on the frame that lowered the hammer safely on a loaded chamber, engineering a generation ahead of its size. It was issued to Luftwaffe officers and to German police units, which meant it was exactly the kind of pistol a GI found on a surrendered officer in the last weeks of the war, small enough to slip into a duffel without a word to anyone. Back home it disappeared the way small things disappear: a sock drawer, a cedar box. 50 years of a family walking past it without knowing it was there. The men who took them rarely explained the eagle stamped into the slide, and the pistol was compact enough that no explanation was ever demanded. What collectors chase now is the marking that ties the gun to a specific hand. A police-marked example carries the stamp of a particular unit, and that stamp is provenance pressed into steel, proof of where the pistol stood in the machinery of the Reich. A wartime 38H runs $600 to $1,300, and a Nazi police-marked rig with its holster can touch $1,500. Provenance, at its outer edge, rewrites the number entirely. A 38H, owned by the SS General Sepp Dietrich, sold for more than $40,000. The pistol was ordinary. The hand that held it was not. Number 20, the Nambu Type 14. It was the pistol most Americans picture when they picture the Pacific, a slim 8mm automatic the men called the Japanese Luger for its silhouette, though the two guns share nothing mechanically. It was the standard sidearm of Imperial Japanese Army officers, notorious in service for a weak striker spring, and it came home by the tens of thousands in the sea bags of sailors and Marines, sometimes still folded inside a wartime newspaper with the surrender headlines legible on the page. Once home, the Nambu took up residence in the nightstand, It came out on the rare evening a father felt like telling one story. And then it went back, and the drawer closed, and the subject changed. Many stayed exactly as packed for 50 years. Matching numbers, spare magazine, clamshell holster. The whole rig frozen at the moment a young man decided he was done with it. The grip angles backward in a way nothing American-made ever did, and children who glimpsed it understood, without being told, that it was not to be touched. The families who unwrap one now are unwrapping the year 1945 itself. The newspaper crumbles. The oil still holds. Collectors chase the complete rigs, the matching magazines, the intact clamshell holsters that survived in almost no other condition. Today, a Type 14 brings $600 to $1,200, and a complete rig with matching magazine, holster, and cleaning rod climbs to $1,600. Number 19, the Arisaka Type 99 rifle. This was the most common Pacific trophy of them all, a 7.7mm bolt action stacked by the mountain after the surrender. The rifle every kid eventually found in a friend's grandfather's attic, dusty and heavy and vaguely forbidden. Most of them are worth a few $100s. The exceptions are decided by a single stamp on the receiver, a flower smaller than a dime. The 16-petal chrysanthemum was the seal of the emperor, and it marked the rifle as his property. When Japan capitulated, the rifles handed over in the surrender piles usually had the mum ground off before they left Japanese hands. A small act of surrender pressed into the steel itself, sparing the emperor the indignity of his crest in enemy holds. But a rifle taken in combat, pulled from a cave or a beach before any grinding wheel could reach it, often keeps the flower intact. That flower separates a common gun from a documented moment. The veterans knew which kind they had. They kept the rifles oiled out of habit, stood them in closet corners, laid them across the rafters, and said nothing of the islands where they earned them. Grandchildren find them now and run a finger over the receiver without knowing what they are checking. A ground mum Arisaka is still a few $100 rifle. One with the chrysanthemum intact runs from about $800 to $1,500, the crest alone multiplying the price. Number 18, the Walther PP. Introduced in 1929, it was the elegant .32 caliber police pistol that fathered the whole family of modern pocket automatics, and by the war years, it hung on the belts of German police, party officials, and officers across the Reich. It was small enough to ride home in a coat pocket, and it did by the thousands, passed inspections that never looked twice at a flat little pistol in a folded uniform. In America, it became the old German pocket gun. It lived in a bedside drawer for decades, cleaned once a year, explained never. The families who knew it existed took it for something bought over a counter, the kind of pistol a man might have picked up anywhere. Almost none of them turned it over in the light and studied the small eagle stamped into the metal, the acceptance mark that tied the pistol directly to the machinery of the Third Reich. The veteran had seen it. That was why the drawer stayed shut. Everything now hangs on that eagle. A plain commercial PP is a nice pistol. A Nazi-marked one is a document. And a marked pistol still riding in its original holster is a documented rig. Collectors read the eagles the way archivists read letterheads. Today, a Nazi-marked Walther PP goes for $800 to $1,500, roughly double what an unmarked commercial example brings. The eagle is the money, and nobody looked. Number 17, the Tokarev TT33. This one came home from colder wars. The Soviet Union's 7.62mm service automatic was a Colt Browning design, stripped to the bare essentials, no safety catch worth the name, no grace, nothing that did not fire the gun. A pistol built the way the Red Army built everything. It armed Soviet officers and then passed to the communist armies of Asia. And Americans pulled them from bunkers in Korea and tunnels in Vietnam across 2 decades of fighting. The men who captured one usually knew what they had. A genuine Russian-made Tokarev was a far rarer prize than the Chinese copies that flooded those battlefields. And a soldier who filed the paperwork carried home a documented enemy sidearm. Then the pistol settled into a drawer and the paper into a shoebox. And both waited. These veterans came home to a country that did not want to hear about their wars, and they said even less than the men of 1945. The shoebox matters as much as the drawer now. Capture papers, when a veteran kept them, turn a common pistol into a documented trophy, and families who threw out the old army forms threw out half the value without knowing it. Today, a Russian TT33 commands $800 to $1,500, more with capture papers, while the Romanian and Polish copies sit at $200 to $300. The Cyrillic stampings are the first thing a collector checks. Number 16, the Walther P38, the variant collectors called the Black Widow. The P38 was the 9mm automatic that replaced the Luger as Germany's standard sidearm. The first successful double-action military pistol, cheaper to build, faster to build, easier to build, in a country running out of time. In the final year of the war, the Mauser plant rushed them out with grips of black plastic instead of the earlier brown, stamped with the 3-letter code BYF that hid the factory's name. The nickname came later from American collectors, for the color. The Germans had no time for nicknames. A GI pulled one from a surrendered officer in the spring of 1945, and it went into the footlocker, and the footlocker went into the attic, and the lid stayed shut for half a century. Families who finally opened it often found the whole rig intact. The pistol, the matching magazine, the holster, all of it untouched since the war ended. The black grip still glossy in a way 60-year-old plastic has no right to be. Collectors read these pistols like late chapters. The BYF code, the black grips, the matching numbers on frame and slide and locking block. Every detail places the gun in the last collapsing year of the Reich, and each part that matches moves the price up a step. Today, a Black Widow P38 with matching numbers changes hands at $900 to $1,800, with standard wartime examples somewhat less. The attic kept it perfect. The silence kept it whole. Number 15? The Radom VIS WZN35, the Polish pistol that fought on both sides of its own occupation. Designed at the Radom Arsenal in 1935, it was a 9mm automatic that many collectors still rank among the finest service pistols of the war, and Poland had barely 4 years to issue it. In September of 1939, the Germans overran the arsenal and found the machinery intact, and for the rest of the war, the VIS was built for the Wehrmacht under occupation. The Polish Eagle deleted from the slide, the workmanship growing cruder with every year the Reich cut corners. GIS took them from surrendered Germans who had themselves taken the factory, and few of those GIs knew what the strange lettering meant. Packed away in 1945, the pistol spent the next decades in a basement, and the ones that stayed there were the lucky ones, spared the holster wear, and the deer camp decades that ruined so many others. A grandson wiping 50 years of oil from the slide sees Polish words on a German trophy. Most families never resolve the contradiction. The market resolves it precisely. Value follows the eagle. An occupation-built VIS with German acceptance stamps brings $1,000 to $2,000. While a pre-war pistol wearing the Polish Eagle climbs into the mid-thousands and beyond, an exceptional early example passing $18,000 at auction. The Eagle is the fortune. The rest is steel. Number 14, the Trapdoor Springfield. The oldest American service rifle still leaning in American closets. It fired the .45-70 cartridge from a single-shot action whose breech block hinged upward at the front like a cellar door, and it armed the regular army from the Indian Wars into the Spanish-American War of 1898. The volunteers who sailed for Cuba and the Philippines carried it into the last war of one century and brought it home at the dawn of the next. This one was never hidden the way the German pistols were hidden. It was simply kept. Kept through the passing of the veteran, kept through the passing of his son, kept through estate sales and attic cleanings that somehow never quite reached the far corner where it stood. By the time a great-great-grandchild pulls it into the light, no one living remembers the man it belonged to, only that it was always in the house, the way a door frame is always in the house. Age is not the price, originality is. More than a century of hard use, shortened barrels, and amateur refinishing stripped away most of the collector value, and the untouched rifle is now the rare one. A worn trapdoor hovers around $700. A fine, correct example, uncut and unaltered, runs $2,000 to $3,000, the reward for 4 generations of benign neglect. Number 13, the MG42 machine gun, the trophy that came with a lifetime of federal paperwork attached. It fired up to 1,200 rounds a minute, with a tearing sound the GIs called Hitler's buzzsaw, and the men who crossed open ground against it in Normandy had reasons to want one on the wall at home. Some of them managed it, but a full automatic weapon cannot simply ride home in a duffel bag and sit in a closet, and the law shaped the fate of every MG42 that reached America. Most came home dead, deactivated, welded through the receiver, de-watt in the collector's term. A machine gun made legally inert, so a veteran could keep the shape of the thing without the tax and registration a live one demanded. It hung in the garage above the workbench for 40 years. And the grandchildren who finally took it down usually assumed the welds were damage. A smaller number were properly registered while registration was still possible, and those papers, not the steel, became the inheritance. The gap between the two fates is the widest on this list. A deactivated bring-back MG42 is a wall piece, worth roughly $2,000 to $4,000. A live registered transferable MG42 now sells for $40,000 to $60,000. The registration alone worth 10 times the metal it describes. 2 identical guns, 2 different fortunes. The difference is a document. Number 12, the Chinese Type 56 SKS. This one proved the paperwork could outvalue the gun. It was a Chinese-built copy of the Soviet SKS, a 7.62mm semi-automatic with a bayonet that folded under the barrel, and it was everywhere in the hands of the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong across a decade of war. American troops captured them by the thousands, and unlike the improvised souvenir-taking of earlier wars, Vietnam had a system, a formal war trophy program, a registration form, a stamped and signed document that let a soldier legally carry his captured rifle home. The rifle went behind the coats in a closet, and in many houses the capture tag stayed tied to the trigger guard for 50 years because no one ever moved it. The men who carried them back from Vietnam were not asked about trophies, and most never mentioned the rifle at all. A son finds it in the 1990s and thinks it is surplus. A grandson finds the tag and looks it up. The tag is the treasure. An undocumented Type 56 is an ordinary shooter in a crowded market, $200 to $500. A papered Vietnam bringback reaches $600 to $1,000, and one with its original capture documents intact has sold for more than $4,000. On this rifle, Mais Prenest Reisens rifle, the paper outgrew the steel. Number 11, the Mauser K98k. The German rifle so common it became invisible. It was the standard 8mm bolt action of the Wehrmacht, carried from the invasion of Poland to the fall of Berlin, stacked in surrender piles across Europe in numbers no one bothered to count. The Army's capture paper system made it the easiest long gun to bring home legally, and so it came home in freight car quantities and turned into the deer rifle nobody explained. Fathers hunted with it every autumn. Fathers cleaned it at the kitchen table. fathers never once said where it came from. That familiarity was expensive. Thousands were sporterized in garage workshops, the stock cut down, the sights swapped, the Waffenamp eagles polished away, and every modification erased money no one knew was there. The rifles worth finding now are the ones left alone, standing original in a closet corner. Every serialized part still wearing the same number. The maker code and the year still crisp on the receiver, and no importer's stamp anywhere on the barrel because a rifle a GI carried home himself never passed through an importer. Collectors have learned to read all of it, the codes, the stamps, the matching bolt. A mismatched or altered K98k stays under $1,000. An all-matching, no-import bringback with its capture papers can reach $3,000 to $4,000. The deer rifle, it turns out, was the most legible gun in the house. Number 10. The Krag-Jorgensen rifle. It was already an heirloom before most of the other guns on this list were forged. Adopted in the early 1890s as the first smokeless powder repeating rifle in American service, a .30-40 caliber bolt action with a side-loading magazine gate unlike anything before or since, it was the rifle American regulars carried up San Juan Hill in 1898. The men who brought it home were not the fathers of the Second World War generation. They were the grandfathers. And so the Krag went into the American house earlier and deeper than any other rifle here. It stood in the closet corner through 2 more wars. It leaned in the barn through the Depression. It waited in the attic while the man who carried it in Cuba was buried. And then his son. And then the rifle simply belonged to the house. Surplus Krags filled gun racks for decades, and countless examples were cut down into deer rifles in garage workshops, each saw stroke erasing what a collector would one day pay for. The prize now is the one nobody remembered to ruin. The untouched rifles survived through neglect, through indifference, through the plain fact that no one recalled what they were. An original, unaltered Krag sells for $1,500 to $3,000 today, and the finest early rifles and carbines touch $6,000. The sporterized ones bring a fraction. The saw was expensive. Number 9. The Luger P08. It came home from 2 wars, and it came home wanting. Doughboys pulled them from the mud of the Argonne in 1918. Their sons pulled them from surrendered officers in 1945. Across both generations, the toggle lock pistol, adopted by Germany in 1908 and mass-produced like no other design of its kind, was the trophy an American soldier wanted above everything else in the enemy's inventory. Men traded for them, bartered for them, guarded them across an ocean. Then the pistol went silent. Wrapped in an undershirt, oiled against the years, set at the bottom of a Foot Locker in an Ohio attic or a Georgia closet, the Luger waited out 5 decades while the man who carried it home said almost nothing. The oral histories repeat one scene with small variations. A grandson lifts the bundle, unwinds the cloth, and finds the pistol exactly as the veteran left it, the oil still faintly slick, the holster folded beside it. What the family holds at that moment depends on details the veteran never mentioned. The maker, the date code stamped over the chamber, and above all whether every small part carries the same serial number down to the magazine. A standard bringback Luger runs $1,700 to $5,000 today, with matching numbers, the original holster, and documented capture history pushing it toward the top of that range. The undershirt cost nothing. Its contents did not. Number 8. The Mauser C96 broomhandle. The older trophy, the pistol that was already famous when the doughboys first saw one across no man's land. An automatic with its box magazine set ahead of the trigger, and a wooden holster that doubled as a shoulder stock, it had been in production since the 1890s, carried by officers who bought their own sidearms, and, in the war years, issued in a 9mm version with a large red numeral cut into the grip so a soldier would not chamber the wrong cartridge. Collectors call that one the Red 9. The men of the First World War brought them home, and the pistols outlived them by generations. In the American house, the broomhandle became a ceremony, brought down from the closet shelf once a year, drawn from the wooden holster, shown to a lucky nephew, and returned to the dark. Diaries from the period record the pride of owning something so unmistakable, so plainly unlike anything sold in a hardware store. Most of the nephews grew old without ever learning where it came from. The design's strangeness is now its fortune. A standard C96 brings $2,500 to $5,000. Red 9s and scarce variants go higher, and factory-engraved examples climb into the tens of thousands. The wooden holster alone, so often discarded as clutter, adds hundreds to the price. The families who kept the clutter kept the money. Number 7, the SS-marked Luger. It is the same toggle lock pistol as number 9, and it is worth several times as much for a reason that has nothing to do with machinery. A small set of stamped runes, or a police eagle over the grip strap, ties the pistol to the units that ran the darkest apparatus of the Third Reich. The market has never priced the steel here. It prices the stamp. The veterans who took these understood the difference even then. These were the pistols kept at the very bottom of the footlocker, wrapped twice, shown to no one. Oral histories record men who would hand a grandson the plain souvenirs and pass over this one without a word, unwilling to explain the emblem or the place it was taken. Some families found one only after the funeral and stood in the attic a long time, deciding what it was they were holding. Authentication is its own reckoning, and it is a careful one. Because the markings multiply the price, they have been faked for 70 years, stamped onto ordinary pistols in ordinary workshops, and a family's untouched attic gun with an unbroken chain of ownership is precisely what the counterfeits can never manufacture. An authenticated SS or police-marked Luger sells for $3,000 to $8,000 and up, with documented provenance climbing well beyond that. A faked one is worth the plain pistol underneath. What the counterfeiters cannot stamp is the story, and only the quiet houses still have it. Number 6, the artillery Luger. Formerly the Luger P08, it was the strangest thing a doughboy could carry off a battlefield of the First World War. A pistol built to be a carbine. It wore an 8-inch barrel, a rear sight graduated out to 800 meters, and a flat wooden shoulder stock that clipped to the grip, and it fed, in its most ambitious form, from a snail-shaped drum magazine holding 32 rounds. Germany issued it to artillery crews and storm troops, and in 1918 it was among the most advanced sidearms on Earth. Almost none of them stayed whole. The stock went into one drawer, and the pistol into another. The drum was lost or sold, or mistaken for scrap, by a family that never knew it belonged to anything. The rig that survived intact survived because a doughboy packed it home complete, and a family left the bundle alone for 100 years, through 4 more wars and 5 more generations in an attic nobody cleaned. A century of leaving it alone turned out to be the most valuable thing the family ever did. An artillery Luger commands $4,000 to $10,000 today, and a matching, complete rig with the correct stock, holster, and 32-round drum brings considerably more. A centerpiece of any collection it enters. The pistol alone is money. The pistol with everything it came home with is a small estate. Number 5. The LeMat revolver. It is the oldest gun on this list, and the strangest thing a family can find in a 21st century attic. 9 chambers of .42 caliber in the cylinder, and beneath the main barrel a second, shorter barrel loaded with buckshot. A revolver and a shotgun sharing a single frame, designed in New Orleans by a French-born physician and carried by Confederate officers in a war that ended in 1865. Every other weapon in this countdown crossed an ocean to get here. This one never left. It did not come home in a duffel bag or a footlocker. It came down through the family, hand to hand, generation to generation, until a descendant lifted a bundle out of a quilt in the attic and held 160 years without knowing it. The gun hidden longest was hidden in plain sight. Its owners were dead before the men who fought the Second World War were born. Confederate manufacture, low production, and that two-barrel design make the LeMat one of the most coveted of all American Marshall handguns, and the survivors are counted, cataloged, and chased. The families who own one almost never know they do. The quilt does its work quietly. An authentic Confederate LeMat now averages around $17,000. Auction examples have passed $20,000, and an early first model example recently sold for more than $50,000. A price the man who carried it home from Appomattox could not have imagined in a lifetime of trying. Number 4. The MP40 submachine gun. It was the sound of the German infantry. A 9mm weapon with a folding metal stock, stamped out of sheet steel, and wrongly called the Schmeisser by nearly every American who ever faced one. A GY who carried one home carried the most tightly held trophy of the European War, and he carried a problem the pistols and rifles never posed. A full automatic weapon cannot simply sit in a closet. Here the law did the sorting. The survivors were welded dead, or quietly turned in, or properly registered under federal rules. And in 1986, the Registry of Transferable Machine Guns closed for good. No new legal examples can ever be added. The supply was frozen in place 40 years ago, and it has been shrinking ever since. Every registered MP40 that exists today existed then. That freeze rewrote what an addict could be worth. A deactivated MP40 is a relic worth a few $1,000s. A live, registered, transferable one is a different object under the same steel, kept in a safe, insured like a painting, shown only to a trusted few. The veterans who registered theirs in time did their grandchildren a favor no one measured until decades later. A registered, transferable MP40 now sells for $16,000 to $35,000, and the paper trail behind it is worth as much as the gun. Number 3, the PPSH-41 submachine gun. The Eastern Front answered with this one, a 7.62mm weapon fed by a 71-round drum, built by the Soviets in numbers approaching 5 million. By 1950, it was in Chinese and North Korean hands, and Americans fighting in Korea learned its sound the way their fathers had learned the MP40s. A few came home in sea bags from a war that has never had the shelf of movies, the parades, or the vocabulary of the one before it. Here the frozen registry cuts the other way. Germany's weapons flooded into America in 1945, in time to be registered by the hundreds. The PPSH did not. Almost none entered the country early enough to make it into the registry before the 1986 cutoff, and so a gun the Soviets built 5 million became one of the rarest machine guns an American can legally own. 5 million made. A handful transferable. That is the entire equation. The Korea bringbacks that were registered came with a lifetime of paperwork attached, renewed, filed, and guarded like a deed. The ones that were not are contraband, whatever the family story. A registered, transferable PPSH-41 brings $25,000 to $32,000, more than the MP40 it fought against because scarcity, not fame, sets the price. Number 2, the SturmGewehr 44. It invented a category. It fired an intermediate cartridge from a 30-round magazine, controllable on full automatic, effective at rifle distances, and every military rifle fielded anywhere on Earth since has followed the pattern it set in 1944. The name itself, SturmGewehr, storm rifle, gave the world the term assault rifle. It was the future. Built in a collapsing Reich, and it arrived too late to save the country that made it. A handful came home in the last months of the war, in the baggage of GIS who pulled them from surrendered depots and understood at most that they were strange. The ones registered in time became transferable machine guns. The rest were welded or lost. A genuine transferable STG-44 almost never surfaces from an attic anymore. The known examples are counted, and the counting is done by men who have waited years for one to change hands. It is the collector's paradox in its purest form. The gun was designed to be cheap. Stamped steel, laminated wood, a wartime economy measure, 80 years of history and a frozen registry have made the cheap gun precious. The stamping is the same. The world around it changed. A registered, transferable STG-44 trades at $30,000 to $50,000, and exceptional examples, matching numbers and accessories intact, have gone well past that. Number 1, the engraved Nazi presentation pistol. It is not a service weapon at all, and that is the point of it. A Luger, a Krieghoff, or a Walther, lavishly engraved, plated in gold or platinum, fitted with carved ivory grips and a fitted walnut case. Made not to be fired, but to be given, hand to hand, among the highest-ranking men of the Third Reich. Ordinary soldiers never saw one. They lived in headquarters, in hunting lodges, in the desk drawers of men whose names ended up in courtrooms. A few came home in 1945 in the baggage of the Americans who cleared those rooms in the final days of the war. And then they did what every gun on this list did. They disappeared. The gold plating was mistaken for cheap costume finish. The case gathered dust beside the Christmas ornaments. The engraving that a Reichsmarshal once ran his thumb across sat unrecognized in an American attic, a souvenir among souvenirs for 50 years. The family assumed it was a toy. The family assumed it was plated tin. The family assumed wrong. Everything at this altitude turns on provenance. A presentation pistol without a documented chain. Who gave it? Who received it? Who carried it home? Is an engraved curiosity. With the chain intact, it is a museum piece. And because the difference is worth a fortune, the fakes are relentless. Engraved yesterday and aged by hand. The appraisers who authenticate these guns work like art historians, tracing tool marks and archives before they trace a price. When the chain holds, the price is unlike anything else a soldier ever tucked into a duffel bag. A documented presentation pistol brings $150,000 to $400,000, and Hermann Goering's own gold-plated Walther has been appraised at up to $400,000. The single most valuable thing an American veteran ever carried up an attic ladder and set down in the dark. These guns were never about the money to the men who brought them home. There was no market to speak of in 1865, or in 1919, or in 1945. Only a piece of the enemy, wrapped in a quilt or an undershirt, carried up a ladder because it was easier than finding the words. The value came later. It accrued in the dark, in the silence, at the rate of a frozen registry and a vanishing generation, while the men who knew the stories died without telling them. Now the grandchildren are climbing the ladders. They are opening trunks from 5 different wars: a Confederate revolver, a doughboy's Mauser, a GI's Luger, a sea bag from Korea, a capture-papered carbine from Vietnam, and learning, one appraisal at a time, what 50 years of quiet compounded into. For every gun on this list, thousands more are still up there. Somewhere this morning there is an attic with a shaft of light through the gable vent, a bundle of oilcloth on a shelf, and a paper capture tag gone brown at the edges, still tied to a trigger guard, still waiting to be read.